Welcome to A Kind Life tonight. I have Taylor Macgregor here. How are you going, Taylor?
I'm wonderful, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. I'm really excited to have you here. I actually do like to mention how I have come across guests. And in this case, you came highly recommended from a previous guest, Austin. So thank you for saying yes to being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's pretty cool to be here.
Now, I do wonder, is it a story we should share how you know Austin?
It's pretty easy. Well, actually, no, it is funny.
Okay, go
So
ahead.
I know Austin through my partner, Amber, who is by default brother and sister through his partner, Tony. And if you've watched the previous episode, I'm sure he's touched on Tony and her story. So I met Amber through a Facebook group called Vegan Singles Melbourne. Shout out to Vegan Singles Melbourne. Very bored Taylor in lockdown 2020 was like, hey, here's me. I like to do XYZ. And she happened to reply. And 2 years later, we're still together and sharing our little life together in this house and full of animals and plants.
That's so cool. I've actually, you do hear some positive stories out of Vegan Singles of Melbourne. So that's a good one. You're a success story.
Yeah, we're a success story, one of the few.
Well, that's very sweet. So yeah, thank
Yeah.
you again. Thanks again for coming on. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm Taylor. I go by he, him pronouns if you're curious. I'm 29 years old, surprisingly. I live not a zero waste life, but a minimal waste life. I've been vegan for 6 years on the 1st of September. So happy anniversary. And I am a cafe manager, unfortunately not a vegan cafe, but I'm going to put it in there. I do photography, zero waste for driving, camping, basically anything that's related to outdoors. You'll probably find me there.
Have you always been passionate about being outdoors?
Yeah, I grew up camping in Byron Bay all my life. So about 6 months out of a year, I'd spend up in Byron Bay up until I was 15, 16.
Wow. Yeah, that would have been an incredible, upbringing. That's really cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool until you walk into your tent to find a bush turkey in there.
Oh, that's a good. Well, I was going to say I'd rather a bush turkey than a snake or something. So
yeah, I'd rather a bush turkey than a goanna.
So it's funny, actually. See, the thing that Austin told me about you, you haven't even mentioned in your little intro there. So he said to me, that you've been involved in Sea Shepherd and that also you are really passionate about beach cleanups and that you've even traveled around doing some cleanups. So do we want to start? Yeah, do we want to start there? Tell us about that part of your story.
All right. So Sea Shepherd has a two-part story. In 2013, I moved to Melbourne. And my mum and I went exploring the CBD and we ended up in Williamstown. And they're like, oh, you should go see the Steve Erwin and the Sea Shepherd ships. And we're like, what the hell's Sea Shepherd? And so we're like, okay, we'll go do it. We've got nothing to lose. And on the 19th of July, I posted a photo on Facebook of two of the Sea Shepherd vessels, the Bob Barker and the Steve Erwin, going, this is so cool, like save the whales, do all this, and then promptly forgot about Sea Shepherd. And then about 2.5, 3 years later, I was working at Starbucks and I made friends with one of the girls who worked at Boost Juice, and she was part of Sea Shepherd. And she's like, oh my God, like come to ODT, like it's our biggest festival, like come learn about Sea Shepherd. I was like, I know Sea Shepherd. And that literally just kickstarted it back in. And at that time, it was also when I decided vegan's the way to go, because when I was in high school, I went to boarding school, which was an agricultural boarding school. So unfortunately, I've learned the nitty gritties of agriculture, and I always knew it. I've seen the abattoirs, I've seen the slaughterhouses, I've seen the trucks, I've been in them. And I just went, nope, we ignore that. And then my senses finally went, no, it's time to acknowledge the fact that that is not right, and gave it up cold turkey. So that's 6 years ago now that I did that, joined Sea Shepherd and went vegan almost in the same month as well. Yeah, and then on and off with Sea Shepherd, I I did a bit of everything. I've done music festivals to do outreach. I've done beach cleanups all through Victoria, from Warrnambool to Lakes Entrance, I think, or somewhere near Lakes Entrance. Terrible memory, don't remember. Down at Mornington Peninsula, all of that. I lived on the Steve Erwin for about 4 months when she was docked in Docklands in 2018/2019. So I had to think about that one. Yeah, so I've done a bit of everything from beach cleans to ship tours. I've been to Sydney with Sea Shepherd to do ship tours in Sydney. That was phenomenal. I'd do a ship tour and I'd walk out from onto the aft deck, and there's the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and I'm like, that's a strange sight. Usually I walk out the aft deck and there's Melbourne, and instead I'm looking at the Harbour Bridge. I was like, I'll take it. But yeah, it's led me on many adventures, and where I've met most of my friends as well. So that's pretty cool.
And so there's a few things there that I'm really intrigued about. You mentioned you went to agricultural, like college or high school. So did you learn there, I suppose the ins and outs of what we now as vegans know that the general public don't know, I guess, in terms of, how animals are treated and, like artificial insemination, etc. Like, did you learn all that at that point?
Yeah, I learned crutching on sheep. I learned, I remember the first time I learned about cattle shows, like when you go to the Royal Easter Show and you see the cattle on display. I was learning how to do that, like how to lead the cow or the steers, I should say. So they don't actually have a ring through their nose. It's just a little clasp that sits there. Not all bulls will have that ring through their nose. And so I was like, oh my God, I get to hang out with a cow every day. Like, this is awesome. I called him Jack Sparrow because I was obsessed with Pirates of the Caribbean. I didn't know then. And I was so like thrilled about it. And I thought it was great because I was like 14 or 13 or something. Until my first show, and they're like, oh, cool, like you did all right. And now the cow's going to go get slaughtered. And I was like, what? Like, no, like, absolutely not. And I was just like, no, I can't do it. And I literally quit on the spot from showing cattle because I was like, I can't. And I actually stopped eating meat for a little bit there. But unfortunately, they don't really have a vegetarian option at an agricultural boarding school. So it didn't last very long, but the passion was still there. I was still like, no, I don't want to. So then I moved into showing chickens because I thought that was a little less harsh because they just put them in a box and look at them and go, yeah, it's a chicken. So yeah, unfortunately, people don't realize that, like the Easter show, that all those cattle you see get slaughtered straight after it. They might do a couple of shows because they're really, really good, but at the end of the day, they're just a hunk of meat according to them. So I was like, no. So I refused to go to the Easter shows or the Melbourne show purely for that fact and the waste. But that's a different story.
And so you mentioned that you're like going vegan and starting with Sea Shepherd was pretty much like, together in terms of timeline, because, did you know before you got interested in Sea Shepherd, did you realize that part of it was being vegan? Is that sort of what it attributed to it, or it just all happened at the same time?
Pure coincidence. I went vegan first because I had a few friends floating around that were vegetarian/vegan, and I was like, seems doable. Like back then, all I had was veggie delight sausages and tofu. Like that's all there was back then. So I was like, I don't really know what I can eat because I loved like chicken schnitzels and all of that. I was like, oh no. So going vegan back then was really hard, and I didn't have any friends or supportive family that were doing that. And then Sea Shepherd happened to follow along in the weeks after that, and I was like, family, because most people in Sea Shepherd are vegan as well, which is really cool.
Yeah,
like Sea Shepherd isn't strictly a vegan organization, but they do support it, so
yeah,
I will give them that.
And so is that where you, I suppose, became passionate about like beach cleanups? Is that from when you started with Sea Shepherd?
Yes and no. It was I've always been a cleanup person. Like I grew up on the beaches with my dad because he was a surfer. By the time he's finished, I'd have like 2 bags full of rubbish. It's type thing, because I just get bored and just pick it all up. So it's always been a thing in my life, I guess. And then Sea Shepherd really, really opened my eyes when they started dropping the hard facts, and I was like, ooh, okay, let's delve into this more. And I'd start doing the beach cleanups with all my friends and learning about all of that stuff. And I was like, all right, this makes more sense. This is my gig.
And so did you start organizing your own ones outside of Sea Shepherd?
I try to. It's a very complicated thing, unfortunately. If I want to do it, and so I started my own campaign called No Trace Left. And it's all about beach cleanups, and not even just beaches, just going around and cleaning up places wherever you are. I would love to organize my own communal beach cleanups. Unfortunately, insurance and liability and all of that stuff follows on. So I usually say, hey, I'm going to be at this place. If you want to join me, come join me. It's your own choice type thing. Yeah, I definitely support it. And my first date with Amber was a beach cleanup. True fact. Like, we literally met at Mordialloc Beach, and I was like, hey, let's have a picnic and then go pick up rubbish.
And obviously it worked.
Like a 4-hour date, and we just picked up rubbish.
I like it. Very, very casual, but also something that you're so passionate about. So she got a good insight into, what the future would hold.
Yeah, I was like, welcome to dating me. I pick up rubbish all the time.
And sometimes your, cleanup extends to like going into the water, doesn't it?
Yeah, I love snorkeling, and I'm learning to free dive as well. So unfortunately, if I'm underwater and I see rubbish, I'm gonna pick it up. With Sea Shepherd, we do beach and dive cleanup sometimes, like combined. And one of my mates, I wasn't close with him, but he was a good mate of mine. He sadly passed away earlier this year doing something he loved, which was diving. We nicknamed him Trolley Trent, because every time he went marine debris diving, he'd come out with a trolley, every time without fail. So we just called him Trolley Trent. But yes, some of the things you find underwater, you're just like, oh my goodness, why is this here? Like trolleys, why is there a trolley at Flinders Pier? No one knows.
You would say, what are some of the weird things that you found?
I found unused fireworks buried in the sand, lots of needles, unfortunately. I found a satanic cult card once, like buried in the sand. I was like, all right, we found sex toys, we found condoms, used, unused, we found trolleys in weird places, and lots of tennis balls. Lots and lots of tennis balls.
Never know what you're going to find.
No, you never know what you're going to find. And sometimes you've just got to really be careful as well. Like some of the places I've done cleanups, I'm like, I should be wearing like the waders that go up to here, because it's just not safe. Like I did a cleanup in Yarra Bend in Melbourne, like close to South Yarra. And I was literally just like wading waist deep in just a sea of rubbish through the reeds. And I was like, this is heartbreaking, just seeing how much rubbish. And ironically, there's a catchment thing like just around the bend that's just overflowing. So we got onto the council and was like, you need to pick your game up on this rubbish collection, because it's clearly not working anymore.
Some are like the top places, or like I suppose, one of your favorite places that you've done a cleanup.
Oh, I've actually done cleanups in really beautiful places as well. I was briefly living last year up in New South Wales in a little town called Eden. I was living about 40 kilometres inland of Eden, and I'd go out along the dirt tracks in the national parks and go out and find the really remote beaches through there. And I just toddle along the rocks, and you're in this beautiful secluded place. And I'm like, oh, this is great. There's no one here. And then I find handfuls of rubbish. And I'm like, oh, that's disappointing. I can't even name half the places because I don't know where I am most of the time. I just follow my nose and I'm like, yep, I'm here.
That's something that's really cool as well, is that you have been traveling and doing cleanups, haven't you? It's not just, you're not just doing it when you're at home, it's while you're on the move as well.
It's always when I'm on the move. I have a 2-pocket bag on the back of my car that lives on the spare wheel. So I can always separate my rubbish too between recycling and landfill. And I can take them out. So sometimes I'll take those out, or I'll take these bags that I have from a company called Outback Cleanups Australia. Big shout out to Bo at Outback. They're called Ocker sacks, and they're made from recycled shade sailcloths. That was a tongue twister. And they're really cool because they're really great on beaches because they filter sand and water out. So you can just pick up all the rubbish. So I've got like 3 of them in my bag at any time.
You've always prepared.
So, always prepared, always picking up rubbish. Caught up with a mate the other day and we ended up down at Rye Beach and I was like, uh-oh, I have a limit of 5 minutes, otherwise I'm going to be here for 3 hours.
Very smart. So, yeah, got to give yourself a time limit.
Yeah, otherwise I've got like 0 impulse control. So I was like, okay, I was like, you're holding me accountable to this one.
Before you mentioned about, trying to live a zero waste or minimal sort of waste lifestyle. So when did that sort of begin for you, and what have you learned over the time?
That sort of started when I really got involved with Sea Shepherd and the marine debris campaign and really learned how detrimental a single-use life is to the environment. So probably about 6 years ago, I really started delving into it. It seems to be a constant here. Yeah, I really learned how impactful a single-use life is. So I stopped using single-use stuff. I started having my own bottle everywhere, having a cup everywhere. Sort of evolved to that. Now at home, it's like I've got my produce bags and reusable bags. We've got our little market basket that we take to our local farmers market. So we get fresh produce from there. It's just all the little things that I replace my single-use items with something that I can use every day. I have 5 water bottles that live with me everywhere. So one's at home, 2 in the car, and 1 at work. So I forget everything. So keep all my bases covered.
What are some easy things that people can do that, want to try and reduce the amount of single-use, items that they are using? Like, what are some of the easy wins in your mind?
I guess one of the easiest things for me, like every day going shopping, for example, is when I'm fresh produce section. Like I literally did this morning. I went to Woolies because I needed some baby spinach, and I had my produce bags with me, and I was seeing one section that had the loose leaf and one that had the packeted wrapped in plastic. And I looked at it and I looked at the price difference and I was like, this is ridiculous. And then pulled out my produce bag and got the more expensive option because it's a single use, and it ended up costing me like $2. So I was like, it's cheaper in the long run anyway. It's simple things like that, just making sure if you've got 2 options, go for the one that doesn't involve plastic.
Yeah.
Like I've literally look at corn that's been peeled off and it's exposed, wrapped in plastic versus a cob of corn. And I'm like, what? Why? Like, yes, it saves you 2 seconds, but I also have a hack for cooking corn. If you like steamed corn, just a whole cob of corn, 3 minutes in the microwave. Like, even don't peel it, just leave it, and it's cooked perfectly.
Yeah.
And you don't need to worry about anything. Chop the end off, pop it out, and it's done.
See, good life hacks.
Used. Yeah, I love it. My mum and I learned that like many moons ago. I'm like, no way. And then we tried it. It was like, oh my God, this actually works.
So the other thing as well that you are interested in is growing your own food?
Yes, I've spent the last 2 days in and out of my garden getting it ready for spring and summer. So it's been a huge learning curve, but it's been something that I've always enjoyed doing, and I've got a bit of everything growing at the moment, including what are they called? A Carolina Reaper chili.
Oh, I've heard of these.
I can't stand chili. Yeah, so I've got a cheeky chili in there amongst all the others, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, I love growing everything. It's like a little afternoon wind down after work.
Are you in like are you in a suburban backyard?
I am. My backyard's like 3 by 3 meters at most. It's tiny, but I'm making every square space available usable.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So is it pretty much filled with, fruit and veg?
Yeah, we've got, off the top of my head, 2 lemon trees. One of them's dwarf, one's going to be a full grown. Several tomatoes of various variety. eggplant, chives, chilies, your usual herbs and spices that you'll find in the garden. I've got my favorite, which is a murnong, also known as yam daisy, which is an indigenous plant that kind of looks like a carrot. Hang on, let's see, tattooed lovely on my arm right there, that everyone's like, nice carrot. And I'm like, thanks, it's a murnong. Yeah, I've got a bit of everything growing at the moment. So I've got a lot of seeds waiting to grow. So peas, snow peas, more tomatoes because I thought there wasn't enough. Watermelon, rock melon, white sage because Amber likes her white sage. And I've actually lost track of what I'm growing now. There's so much that I've lost track. So we'll see what sprouts up and go from there.
It's pretty impressive that in 3 meters by 3 meters you're growing so much. That's really cool.
Yeah, Facebook Marketplace, you just go through and you find out planter boxes, and I've just found this guy that lives locally, makes them out of recycled timber. So I'm like, sweet. I just hit him up every so often. I'm like, can I get a box this size? And like, so you can 20 minutes later, he's like, done.
So you slowly kind of can add on as well as you go along.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to moving day.
Yeah, that could cause a little bit of an issue.
We're inside the house, like, I don't know, there's plant there, there's a massive fern in the corner on the other side, there's dried flowers here, there's plants next to me, like they're literally everywhere. There's probably 200 plants in the whole house at the moment. It's a bit hectic.
And the other thing as well that I did notice on your social media is that you have lived off grid before. So can you tell us about that? That's really intriguing.
That was every incident that happened was worth it. So in 2020, I quit my job. I'd had enough. I'd done however long in lockdown and full-time caregiver for my mum. And she's like, I'm going to go live with my family so I can be with them. And I was like, that's fine. I'm going to quit my job and go live with my dad for a bit. And that was up near Eden in a little tiny town called Byron. No one's ever heard of it because it's about 30 people that live there. And he has 60 acres. And I was just like, I'm going to set up a big canvas wall tent right next to the river and live my best off-grid life. And I did. I had 150-watt solar panel that I just folded out every day, and that powered my fridge, which also charged my phone and gave me light. And I had no phone reception, no internet, nothing. So it was great. I had to drive 6 or 7 kilometers up the road to get reception, and that was 1 bar of 3G. So it was really great because it just really brought you back to earth. I could literally tell you exactly what the time was without looking at a watch. Like it really, and now I'm like back in suburban. I'm like, I have no idea what time it is anymore. But yeah, it was just so nice to just wake up every day to the earth instead of technology and industry around you instead. It was really nice. Yeah.
How did you find the solitude, like being by yourself?
It was a really hard adjustment at first because I'm used to, at that point, I'd just started developing my relationship with Amber, and I was like, I'm used to being in bed, just like texting and just talking in general to anyone. And then to suddenly be alone in the bush, just sort of going, I can't even call someone to be like, hello, like, because my dad lived on the other end of the property. So it was like, I was alone. And yeah, it took a bit of adjustments because you hear trees creaking, you're like, is that going to fall on me tonight? Like, obviously I took the right measurements to make sure there was no trees that are going to come down around me, but just adjusting to just being so exposed in nature was a bit of a thing, but I was used to it because I grew up camping. So it was just living in that permanent camping zone that I was like, oh, this is different, until the next morning I walked out of my tent and just looked straight at a river and I was like, yeah, this is the life I needed.
And would you do it again?
Oh, in a heartbeat. I keep saying to Amber, I'm like, I'd rather go live in my tent than here at the moment. But she's like, no, we're gonna buy a property and live in an actual house. And I was like, I guess that could work. I guess that's reasonable.
Maybe I was going to suggest maybe a tiny house, but maybe not with 200 plants.
Yeah. I keep saying, like, if we get a big property, we'll get like a little tiny house that people can rent out, as well as our little abode that we'll have full of plants and animals.
And what animals do you have?
Oh, we've got a menagerie. We've got I've got a 130-litre fish tank that has many fish in it that I've had for many, many, many years. We've got two cats and 3 snakes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
You have a bit of a mix there.
A bit of a mix of animals. The oldest pet we've got is my snake, and he's 22 years old. And the youngest in the house is probably one of my fish that was recently born this year, but followed by that was the cats.
Okay. How long do snakes normally live for?
They live for about 30 years.
Oh, wow.
And 8-year-old me was like, I really like snakes, after meeting one time. My dad's like, here you go, they live for 30 years. And 8-year-old me goes, how long's 30 years? I still haven't found out.
You're still working that one out.
I'm still waiting for that one.
And you mentioned earlier that, you know, you're quite like interested in 4-wheel driving. So is that just is that something you grew up with as well when you were a kid, camping and things with your family?
Not really. Like, my dad has always owned a 4-wheel drive, but he's never been the one to really go 4-wheel driving. He's like the soft tracks, I call them, also known as fire trails. And so he's always had the 4-wheel drive and the camping part, but never like the let's go off-road and actually do some challenging, lock it in 4-wheel drive and have to think about it how we're driving. I'm not sure where I got it from. I just sort of always had that interest, and I was like, I'm going to own a 4-wheel drive. And so my third car was a 4-wheel drive. We just slowly went bigger and bigger and bigger.
And I did wonder, you know, I suppose, what's like your position on, you know, that some people think that, 4-wheel driving, you know, it doesn't really align, I guess, with like trying to be a bit more like, you know, environmental and, you know, caring for land and nature. Like, where do you sort of sit on that?
Oh, I'm definitely the outcast in the 4-wheel drive community. Not in a bad way, just I'm clearly very different. I recently went to the Melbourne 4-wheel drive expo at the showgrounds, and I was walking around and I was like, wow, I am definitely not the sort of person that would be expected to be here. Like the vibe was beers and steaks, essentially, was most of the thing. And like, you know, you go out bush and you just rip up the tracks and have some fun and then get drunk all night. And obviously that's not everyone, but it seems to be the culture that's pushed mostly, unfortunately. So it's very interesting for me as someone who A, doesn't drink, and B, doesn't eat steak, to go, oh, I guess that's not quite me, but you know, it's still cool to see where people end up. Like one of my favorite YouTubers is vegetarian. I was like, wow, that's actually really exciting, because you don't see that. Like, he's literally the only one that I know of that is vegetarian. And I was like, that's still cool. Like, that made me happy to see that he was even talking about it on YouTube and being like, yeah, this is what I do. Yeah, I'm sorry, I've lost myself for a second.
No, that's okay. No, I was just, sort of thinking, you know, along the lines of, have you kind of experienced, you know, other people that are like in the 4-wheel drive community that are trying to do their best to, you know, look after the environment when they're out there, or is it a bit of a mix?
There's a bit of a mix. Unfortunately, you only hear about the bad stuff a lot of the time. So a good example was one of my favorite campgrounds out in a little town called Nuji. Got closed down because some hoons went out there in their 4-wheel drives and literally ripped up an entire bench seat to use as their bonfire, and just did donuts through the whole campground. So they had to shut it for about 8 months just to let the whole place regenerate. And it's still actually closed. I went to go out there the other week and they were shut still. I was like, oh, that's disappointing. And due to that, they're actually putting bollards in a lot of the campgrounds so you can't camp with your car, which isolates a lot of 4-wheel drivers because they camp out of their vehicles rather than living tent site car. But on the good side, there's been a lot of movements about respecting the bush. So one of the biggest YouTube channels, 4Drive 24/7, they started really talking about cleaning up the bush. Like they've done a few cleanups out on the tracks, including removing abandoned vehicles that are just left to burn on the side of a track. They've taken that sort of stuff out, which then sparked a movement called Respect the Bush through this 4Drive company. Well, I won't name because he's a little problematic, but I'm going to promote the Respect the Bush side because I thought that was really awesome to bring ahead of all these people to be like, you know, take 2 bags out, one for you, one for cleaning up the rubbish around you. And I was like, that's really cool. He literally, all you had to pay was postage.
That's good.
And I was like, that's really awesome. So I really got on board with that and thought that's something worth noting and pushing in the 4Drive community. Because a lot of the time you'll pull up to camp and there's beer bottles everywhere and bottle caps and bits of burnt rubbish left in the fire pits. And you're like, come on, man, like, it's not nice to rock up to after a hard day driving on tracks that you put yourself into. It's still not fun.
Yeah.
To come to camp and be like, cool, I have to clean up your rubbish too. Thank you.
Yeah. You mentioned that, you know, you feel like a little bit of an outcast in that community, but I'm guessing, you know, you've found your community in other ways. You mentioned earlier Sea Shepherd. You know, is that sort of played a big part in finding, you know, your community and friends?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I'm not really friends with a lot of people in the 4Drive community. Like, I know a couple people, but I don't really know many because I just don't click with those people. But through Sea Shepherd, yeah, like that's where I really found my friends in Melbourne. Being someone who's moved down from Sydney to Melbourne, no one talks about how hard it is to find friends as an adult. So joining with Sea Shepherd, I met a lot of similar-minded people, and like one of my great mates, like we've been mates for like 5 or 6 years now, and we met through Sea Shepherd. So I wouldn't change a thing about that.
And how did you find it when you went vegan, you know, the support of like friends and family?
It was interesting. I was very hungry for a while because I didn't know what to eat. And the choices back then compared to now were very limited. So it was hard. I lived with my mother at the time, and she's not vegan, and she's tried it out, but not ever going to go vegan. So it was very hard to go from eating with her to suddenly having to cook entirely independently. And none of my family are vegan as well, so learning to really show them, because they were like, oh, all you do is eat lentils and tofu and rice. And I was like, yes, but there's also carrots. Yeah, like having to really explain to everyone, and like none of my friends were vegan pre-joining Sea Shepherd, so I was like literally trying to find anything to relate with people, and they're like, oh, you're vegan, how boring. And I was like, are you kidding me? Every day is an adventure. Like, what am I going to find to eat today? I don't know. But yeah, it was a challenge, but worth it. It's definitely worth it, because now 95% of my friends are all vegan, so it's cool to be in that bubble now.
Do you find yourself the Cool Kids Club? Do you find yourself gravitating towards like vegans? Is that kind of where, you know, you find, I suppose, similar like values in your friendships? Or
kind of like at my work, I've made friends with people at work now, and it's almost fun to explain to them, because they just see vegan and go, oh, and think of the worst vegans you can think of and go, you're gonna be a pain in the neck. And working in hospitality, they're like, oh, vegans, like, and I'm like, oh, it's not just vegan, it's allergies as well. Like, coming in from that perspective of being like, choosing vegan is also opening it to a lot of people who have allergies. Because if they've got a dairy allergy or an egg allergy or whatever it is, it's like you can actually accommodate for it and still have a really tasty meal. And just bringing that to my friends, because the ones that aren't vegan think I have a really boring diet. I'm like, are you kidding? I had a schnitzel sandwich for dinner last night with cheese and barbecue sauce. Like, no animals were harmed in the making of it. Like, so it's just proving like anything you can eat, I can eat vegan.
Exactly.
It came from a company way back a few years ago. I don't even know who they were anymore, but it's stuck in my brain.
Yeah.
Because they have a picture of a donut.
And how do you find, working in hospitality? Like, do you find it difficult to, be around like non-vegan food and serving it and selling it and things, or is it just something you sort of compartmentalize in a way?
That's a two-part question. So when I first joined hospitality, I wasn't vegan, and then I went vegan, and that was really hard to suddenly be like dealing with things I no longer ate. It got to a point where I couldn't actually handle some of the food because the smell of it made me want to throw up. So then they're just like, okay, Taylor, you can just make coffees instead. Like, just stay away from the food. And I was like, whew. And then I left hospitality for a little bit and came back. And when I came back into hospitality, it was for a vegan cafe. So I got really spoiled by me working in a vegan cafe. I was like, oh, this is wonderful. I can eat everything. I don't have to think about it. Like, it's, what more could you want? And then due to finance, I just had to move away from it and went into a cafe that wasn't vegan, and that was like a slap to the face. So I was like, oh, I don't want to deal with this anymore. But now I'm quite deep back into it, and I'm very used to just blocking it out. Now every time I see a vegan version, I'm like, hell yeah, this is great. And I'm like, this is way better than having to deal with the non-vegan options.
Yeah.
And I always recommend to customers, like, I always point out all the vegan options without going, it's vegan. I'm just like, oh, this one's really good. Don't tell them it's vegan.
Yeah, makes sense. And is there anything you would suggest to people, like advice to people that want to get involved in something like yourself, where you've been doing beach cleanups or trying to reduce waste in their life? Is there anything you'd suggest how they can start out and get involved?
Starts at home. Like, it's as easy as that. Like, just making those changes at home, from getting the plastic produce bags to having a packet of reusable ones that you just keep clipped to your shopping trolley. Like, it's honestly that simple. A lot of people think zero waste is like, oh, I've got to replace everything in my home at once. And it's like, no, you just need to, as you use it, replace it type thing. So we've gone from having a plastic bottle dish detergent to a glass bottle that we fill up each time and reuse it. Personally, I don't use that one. I've got a dish soap that I use instead, that's zero waste. So it's, just changing things as you go along, instead of just replacing everything and wasting those things that you've still got instead. And I mean, if you're really uncomfortable using it still, once you've made that connection, give it to someone who's going to use it instead. Like you'll hear a lot of vegans, once they go vegan, they don't want to use their leather shoes anymore, so they throw them out. I'm like, give them, like, donate them to an op shop, or give them to a friend who's got the same foot size, who's been eyeing those shoes off for 6 months, and you're like, here you go, here's a pair of shoes. It's just about utilizing what's around you already as well. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people wanted to follow your journey or reach out if they had any questions, are you happy for them to contact you? Is it best on Instagram, or how should they get in contact?
Oh, look, I am terrible at social media. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be very honest about that. Best way is definitely through my Instagram. I've got trace left, which is no_trace left, and my photography page as well, that I'm going to slowly try and integrate the two together, which is called Tailored Photography, but that's spelled TYLRD photography. Can't even spell my own name. They're probably the best two. And then worst case scenario, there's a link to my email as well, so you can always email me.
Yeah, awesome. And is that something you're starting to do, focus a little bit more on, photography? Yeah,
I'm definitely trying. I'm literally looking at my camera right now because I was using it the other day when I went on a little adventure. Unfortunately found a deceased bird due to pollution. That was hard. But yeah, photography, it's always been in my life, but I'm really starting to invest in it and turn it into like a little side gig as well, if I can.
What sort of things are you focusing on when you're, capturing images?
Bit of everything, honestly. I wouldn't mind trying out photo shoots with people and pets and all of that sort of stuff, but mostly it's landscapes and macro and bugs. I absolutely love photographing bugs.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I've seen a few on your Instagram. It's really cool. So yeah, I know I sort of thought you might have been adding a few more because there isn't a whole batch there, but there's, it seems to be the start of it. So that's exciting.
Yeah. I've unfortunately my last workplace was just eating my life up. So I wasn't getting a chance to get out there. But now I've got a better work-life balance. I can actually get back out there and take photos and clean up a lot more and get that content out there.
That's awesome. Did you happen to have a favorite quote that you wanted to share to finish the episode?
Oh, look, I have many depending on the day. One of my favorite at the moment is you can't pour from an empty cup. Look after yourself first, otherwise you can't really do much for anyone else or anything else. That's probably my most important at the moment, because I know we're all struggling at the moment coming out of lockdowns and just realizing just how screwed the world is at the moment. Like, look after yourself and you can look after others.
Yeah, it's very true.
Yeah,
very true. Now, is there anything we might have missed that you did want to mention?
I don't know. I could talk for hours, honestly. I'm sure no one else has time for that. Come talk to me. Like, I have stories about so many things, about doing so many places and just learning how to navigate the world, especially as neurodivergent, and learning that I have ADHD. You see the world a lot more differently, which makes me very bad at social media because I forget that it exists.
It's probably not a bad thing sometimes. So
no, it's like a blessing and a curse at the same time, being someone who wants to be somewhat successful at getting my message out there and then going, oh, I forgot it exists. It's been 6 weeks. Whoops.
And when were you diagnosed with ADHD?
I'm actually in the process of it as we speak. I have my second appointment on Thursday, so I'm pretty keen to it, but my psychiatrist was like, I'm not allowed to say this, but you're definitely a textbook ADHD. It was like my first appointment. I was like, cool, I'm glad that's confirmed.
And are you comfortable to talk about like what sort of impacts that, what you found, I suppose, in terms of like your day-to-day life, some of the things that you found that is affecting?
Oh yeah, it literally affects every part of my life. From everyone says out of sight, out of mind. It's literally how I live my life. If I can't see it, I don't know it exists. And that it sounds really harsh, but it includes people and places and things as well. So I'm sorry to all my friends that I haven't talked to for 6 weeks because I forgot that you existed. People think it's just your attention, but it's not. It's literally every part of your life, from short-term memory to trying to do like a set list of tasks in a day. So if I have an appointment at 3 p.m, I can't do anything until 3 p.m. and that appointment's done, because my brain is like, if we don't focus on this, we'll forget that it's there. And next minute it's been 3 hours and I'm like, oh, whoopsies, I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can be tricky.
Do you think like there's less stigma around ADHD, like as it's becoming more like there's more awareness and knowledge around it?
A little bit, yeah. Like I can think of like 4 or 5 friends off the top of my head right now that all have ADHD or are in the process of being diagnosed with ADHD, which tells you just how common it is. I think it's 1 in 20 people now. So just tells you how many friends I have if I've got 5 people with ADHD. Yeah, it's definitely becoming a lot more accepted. I've definitely struggled in some of my workplaces. I've been told if we knew the extent of your ADHD, we wouldn't have hired you. So you do face that sometimes as well, because they just see you as disorganized and not paying attention. So unfortunately it has its drawbacks, but you learn to draw strength on those as well. So that's why my photography and my cleanups, like I go into hyper focus mode on cleanups, and it's like I feel like 10 minutes has gone by and 2 hours has passed and I've got like 2 bags of rubbish. So I'm like, I'm not mad about it.
Yeah, I've heard a friend say that, she believes it's almost like a superpower in some way, that like you were saying about having such high attention to what you're working on and focusing on, like that nothing else in the world kind of matters in a way.
Yeah, it's definitely like, don't get me wrong, there's days where you're just frustrated with yourself because you're like, can I just stay focused on this one thing? But turns out that one thing's really boring and you'd rather go pick up rubbish. Literally thoughts I've had. But yeah, you learn to sort of harness the powers when you can, because sometimes it's a bit of a roll of the dice game. You're like, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this or not.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Taylor. I really appreciate you sharing your story and also your honesty and, and where you're coming with things. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to seeing, you sharing a little bit more on social media if you have the time and the capacity.
Thank you very much for inviting me to have a chat. It's been wonderful.
My pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.